All right, everyone, welcome back. Our next panel is going to be an awesome one, really kind of dealing with the biggest organizations here in terms of royalties, collection and distribution. So I will let our moderator today introduce the panelists that we have on screen here. But for this panel specifically, we're going to be talking to these three organizations, and Portia's going to be moderating, and we're going to be specifically diving into all of the new tools and just access to data that these three organizations have been developing for a long time now, and just tools that they're putting into the hands of business managers, music managers and clients, just, in terms of tracking, paying out the appropriate royalties. So that being said, I'll turn it over to these four wonderful folks. Portia Sabin is the president of the Music Business Association. We were just talking backstage about the sheer amount and quality of events and resources that Music Business Association puts out there, and highly recommend, if you're not subscribing to those emails and attending the events that Portia and her team are putting on, I would highly suggest that. We'll put the link into the chat here. But Portia, wonderful to have you here. Thank you for moderating today and pulling together these panelists. And I think that being said, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Matthew. I appreciate it. So yes, I'm Portia. I'm the president of the Music Business Association. We're a trade association in the music space for pretty much everyone who touches the commerce of recorded music. So we have business managers amongst our membership, as well as labels, distributors, publishers, retail stores, tech companies, etc. So we have sort of we're kind of an interesting cross section in the industry of sort of everyone in the commerce space. So I'm excited to talk to my distinguished panel today. These guys are awesome. And, these three organizations that we have on this panel are really a critical part of, the central core of what we are doing in the music industry today, which is, creating a whole bunch of income streams that need to be captured and followed and kept track of. And I always say that, metadata is not sexy, but it's essential. And I wish it was more sexy. We'd have more fun talking about it. But, basically what artists create at this point is metadata and content. And what these folks on this panel do is help artists and their teams keep track of that and make sure that they're getting the income on the transactions that are happening out there. So I thought I would kick it off by letting everybody introduce themselves and talk just for a second about their organizations, just so you guys get a real clear picture. So Colin, I'm going to pick on you first.
Okay.
If you don't mind starting.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Portia. Really glad to be here. My name's Colin Rushing. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of Sound Exchange. In the United States, Sound Exchange is probably most well known for collecting and distributing digital radio royalties, so money owed to artists and record labels by SiriusXM, Pandora, and a few thousand other digital radio services. In that role, we've also had to, we have become sort of leaders around and innovators around music metadata and rights management and so forth. The other thing that Sound Exchange has entered into is the world of the publishing side of the business. And so a few years ago, we acquired this CMRA. CMRA handles mechanical royalties in Canada. And so we've had to, and we're in the process of pulling these two worlds together as we speak. So glad to be here.
Thank you. James Leach, tell us what you guys do at CSAC.
Well, I am Vice President of Creative Services and Writer-Publisher Relations, based out of Los Angeles office for CSAC, which is the nation's second oldest performance rights society. And we collect performance income, digital mechanical income through some of our other mechanisms and our other subsidiary companies. And I'm happy to be here and share some information.
Thank you. And the newest and youngest entry into our rights capturing organization, Chris Aaron from Mechanical Licensing Collective.
Thanks, Portia. Great to be here. I'm not young, but it's nice to be with the youngest organization. It's keeping me young. So the Mechanical Licensing Collective, or the MLC, is a new collective management organization here in the United States that exclusively administers the new blanket license that Congress established when it passed the Music Modernization Act a couple of years ago, that allows digital audio services to use songs on their services. They then pay us the mechanical royalties due in connection with those uses, and we distribute those to music publishers, administrators, collective management organizations around the world that represent those interests in songs, and then finally self-administered songwriters. And we can talk a little bit more about that during the panel.
Awesome, thank you. So I want to start sort of historically. So, 15 years ago, two of these organizations on this panel didn't exist because we had a different business model, obviously, as we all know. In the music industry, we had a physical marketplace, but CSAC did exist. So James, can you sort of talk us through the transition that you guys went through at CSAC in terms of being a, performing rights organization? You collected a certain type of royalties for many, many years, and then you guys had to change.
Well, we didn't have to change. We just adapted to what was starting to happen in the industry. The company was founded in 1930, and primarily to collect performance income from radio, and then branched out into film and television, or television, I should say, film, general market licensing through stores and licensing in that regard. And it's grown incrementally with the industry and with the changes that have happened with the consumption of music, the distribution of music in this new digital space. And, going forward, that's what we've been doing. We've implemented, we've got a lot of background stuff there. Okay. I hope everything's okay. In this new age of digital that we're in now, and music consumption that we're in now with the various DSPs, it's more incumbent upon us to be able to shift, to have had shifted, to be able to collect and distribute those royalties to our creators in that space. So we now collect, digital mechanicals through our association, through Harry Fox. Through Harry Fox, we also, as I'm sure Chris is aware, with the relationship we have internationally, we put together an organization by the name of Mint, which works with Suiza to be able to. It's a multi-territorial. Mint is basically a multi-territorial digital licensing company of sorts. So we're able to collect in territories outside of the U.S. as well through our association with Suiza, and we're branching out into other pan-European countries as well, moving into spaces in Africa, India, Asia, Australia. So we're growing, we're rocking and rolling.
Definitely. So in 1998, the DMCA basically created a new income stream for artists, which was the master use license for digital music for a specific type of digital music. So Sound Exchange was created to collect this new royalty stream. Colin, you want to give us a little pricey there?
Yeah, sure. And so it's sort of wild because now it seems sort of normal. The Sound Exchange income is a pretty huge part of record industry revenue. That was definitely not the case in 1998. It frankly wasn't the case for about a decade after 1998. The revenues from sort of digital radio were pretty small. Now it seems sort of normal. But at the time, it was this, frankly, an idea and a recognition by Congress and the industry that digital was going to transform the industry. I think probably most people on this call know that regular radio doesn't pay anything at all for recorded music. And the reason for that is there's not a performance right for a general performance right for sound recordings. So 1995 and then 1998, Congress created a digital performance right that was for digital radio, which at the time really was only Music Choice, and then this kind of idea of satellite radio, Sirius XM. With the sort of growth of broadband and all of that, digital radio took off in around 2009, 2010, and became a sort of powerhouse. And this royalty stream just grew and grew and grew. And so now, even though in the United States, the performance right is narrow, it's only sort of digital radio, and in the rest of the world, all radio pays. In the United States, the United States is the single biggest digital radio market in the world. We're collecting nearly $1 billion. So when Congress created this performance right, it also created a statutory license, basically a government license to set the rates. There is a concern that I guess that some people had, that the record labels would not license these new digital radio services, and they wanted them to have a sort of government license to have access to. Sound Exchange was formed to administer that license. The rates are set by a rate court. We litigate in that to get, frankly, the fair rates established, and then our job is to collect and distribute the money that comes in. It's an interesting model. It's and it's very unique in the record industry because the services that use our statutory license, they don't have to have direct relationships with record labels, which means the data that they're providing to Sound Exchange, often they're generating themselves. It's this sort of usage data that, sometimes it's based on official information from record labels. Often it's just literally folks keying in metadata they get from whatever source. And so we have to take in all of these sources of data, take in all the money that that these services are sending us, and then allocate it fairly among record labels and recording artists. Last thing I'll say, I think probably, again, everyone on this call knows this, but another way that the Sound Exchange distributions are unique is that half the money goes to record labels and half goes directly to the artists. Most of it to what's called the featured artist, and then a portion to the non-featured artists. That's whether or not the artists are under contract to a record label, and whether or not they have any other sort of obligations. And so that, again, makes it sort of unique. In the record industry, it's akin to what you have with the PROs on the writer side. Anyhow, so that's the sort of quick overview of what we do. It was a little rambly, but that's the snapshot.
We get there in the end, right? It all works. But it's important that you bring up. I mean, I think all of these things work together in sort of building a picture, because we could have, if I'm thinking about the three organizations on this panel, we could have one person that collected every single right that you guys, your three organizations, administer. If that person was a songwriter and a performer, self-published, and their own record label. Mm-hmm. So that person could be all of these, could touch all of you. So before we get into the fun stuff, Chris, as you mentioned, the MLC was created also by Congress, by an act of Congress in terms of, the Music Modernization Act of 2018, to collect and administer another new royalty stream that sort of sprang out of this digital ecosystem. So can you explain how that works?
Sure. Much like Sound Exchange, our organization came into being following an act of Congress, and we also administer a government-created statutory license. Unlike Sound Exchange, our license covers rights on the song side or the publishing side. So again, I know that for many of you, that's an obvious point, but I can't tell you how many times we get questions on webinars about whether we now replace Sound Exchange, or if you're signed up to CSAC, do you need the MLC? So, and this is the moment when I'm talking, when the cat is all up in my business, so forgive me. But you need all of us one way or another. And we administer the new blanket license that covers those digital audio uses. I actually just put in the chat, I think I did, a link to a chart that we have on our website that shows the breakdown between the different royalty streams that are represented here. So you can see on the publishing side, there are performance royalties, the kind of royalties that James's organization administers. There are the mechanicals that we now administer for digital audio uses, but not for physical uses or uses of songs on video. So there are still other reproduction rights that we don't administer. And then on the record side or the sound recording side, there are the distribution rights that record companies and distributors handle, and then of course Sound Exchange. But we just came into being. Our first royalty distribution went out a couple of weeks ago. The blanket license became effective in January. We now account on a monthly basis to our members. Membership is free. All of our costs are paid for by the digital services. That was another unique feature of the Music Modernization Act, which is a great benefit to rights holders. And membership really just is the word we use to describe connecting with us, giving us your banking information, letting us know who you are, and then connecting your payment account with the works that you have registered and are entitled to receive mechanicals on. So it's a pretty straightforward process. You can start it by going to our website, and we've already begun paying people.
Fantastic. Yeah, the three of you have good jobs. You work for good companies because you guys pay artists. I think that's got to be really fulfilling at the end of the day, to feel like you're giving money to the people who create the art and music that we love, and that is the reason that all of us do these jobs in the crazy music industry. So I wanted to touch a little bit on technology, because I know all of us who've been in the industry for a long time have experienced people walking into the industry and saying, "Oh, the way that you guys do things here is crazy. What you need is a tech solution, and I've got it. And I'm going to make this, I'm going to make this all smooth and work for you." My mind goes to the blockchain bros, as I call them, about 5 years ago, and are remarkably quiet these days. And I think what we really need to focus on is that all of your organizations, all of the ways that people get paid involves putting metadata in at the base level, which is correct, and following up on it and making sure it remains correct. So the element of human error, the element of accident, is so important to not black out, because whatever tech solutions we have, at the end of the day, we have to have humans inputting this data. And so I think what's really great, I'm going to pick on Colin just because I'm familiar with Sound Exchange's systems, since I ran a record label for 13 years. What's great about that is that you guys are constantly chasing and saying, hey, what about this? What about this one? What about this title? What about this usage?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, and you might know more about our systems than I do, to be honest, but I will do my best. There are a couple of things with our approach that I think work really well. So one, like I said at the beginning, so we get a lot of our reporting is in the form of usage data provided by services that may not have direct relationships with record labels, and certainly don't with artists, right? And so we end up having to sort of connect dots that the service hasn't connected. And that means there is a lot of exactly what Portia was saying, like getting the information from the rights owners, getting the information from the artists, and then lining it up to the usage data. Couple things that we do to empower the rights owners and the artists is we have pretty robust tools available to them through our Sound Exchange Direct, our online portals, which we're constantly revising to make it easier for artists and labels to basically do self-help. We have a strong bias to rely on information directly from the rights owners themselves. We try to treat that as authoritative, and then we're trying to line that up to the usage information. The other thing we do is we have had to develop pretty robust processes to frankly deal with overlaps. Often labels will claim the same recording, more often than not, like the huge majority of the time, one of them is frankly just mistaken, because the data can be confusing, and especially when you're dealing with records that are distributed in other countries by different distributors than in the United States. And so we have had to develop mechanisms where we can put the parties together and they can rapidly work that out. Nonetheless, mistakes happen, right? And so we end up paying the wrong person. And that, again, is something that we have sort of managed to roll with. Our bias is in favor of getting money out the door, but we also have really robust adjustment processes. And so if we do pay the wrong person, it's very straightforward for us now to basically do historic adjustments to make sure that everyone's accounts balance out. The last thing I'll say that I'm pretty proud of is the level of detail in our statements. This is a real priority for Mike Huppy when he became president, was to just really err on the side of providing more detail to rights owners and artists. And so our statements have basically all the same detail that we have in terms of how the payments go out. And I think now that's more or less expected across the industry. At the time, it was pretty unusual. And so, those I think are the main sort of ways that we try to, frankly, empower the labels and the artists to get control over this revenue stream and their rights.
James, how do you guys at CSAC help your writers sort of navigate just the most basic part of getting their data in correctly so they can get paid?
Well, when we first bring someone on board, we give them very thorough instructions on what to do and how to do those things. Granted, that information usually ends up leaving their memory banks as soon as they walk out of the office and they get home, and we find out, or they find out, I should say, 6 months or however long later that they didn't register a song properly, or that they get into a studio after we've already spoken with them. And these are very thorough, like I said, discussions about the process. It's not brain surgery. It's actually very simple, but it's things that, you can second guess. And there's a lot of misinformation that gets spread when you get in the studio or collaboratively working with someone. When you finish the song, someone says, oh, okay, well, let me go ahead and register the song. And that person is not with, let's say they're not with CSAC. They're with ASCAP or BMI or, GMR, what have you. So the person says, I'll go ahead and register it. And, your writer you might think that that's being handled, and that's not the case. What has to happen, everyone should register their song in their own respective societies with their correct information so that society can go ahead and take care of you, make sure that those royalties are paid out, Otherwise, you run the risk of missing out on monies. And then we've got to go and backtrack, which a lot of times can, affect the earnings, because there are peaks that happen within the song. And if you go out too far, you're going to miss that earnings peak for those performances. So it can be quite detrimental to not do that. And to throw it back a little earlier to your statement about tech companies, a lot of these tech companies, they have great solutions, they have great ideas, but they don't know the intricacy that's involved with entering in the metadata and understanding the levels at which the three of our companies pay a writer. So they look at it from a very surface view and thinking, okay, our company can reach out to all these people and collect based on example A. But what about B, C, and D? There's a variety of things that you have to look at here. And you've got to make sure all of that is covered in order to accurately pay your writers, and make sure your clientele is taken care of. So,
absolutely. So Chris, how have you guys been handling this? Because I remember you opened up sort of the beta version so that songwriters could go in and check their information starting like last summer before you guys came online. So you've had almost a year now of interactions with individuals. How's that going? Are you guys, I mean, listen, there's always going to be human error. There's no perfect system. But how are you guys responding to that and helping folks get themselves organized?
Sure. I think the first thing I would say, it really is more than just human error. We work in a business where the product is music, and music is timeless. It's everlasting. So there are records today that are generating revenue for creators that were recorded and released 50 years ago, songs that were written 50 years ago. I'm old enough to remember a time when there were no computers. My kids the other day said, "When did you get your first cell phone?" And I said, "When I was a kid, there were no cell phones. There were phones attached to wires attached to walls, and you had to dial the numbers." So we're operating in a business that predates every aspect of technology that today we take as a given. And the data was first captured by hand for decades.
Right.
In the industry a long time, I still marvel at how you'd see label copy, and the earliest versions of label copy were literally pieces of paper where someone drew the circle from the inset of the record, the vinyl record, and they hand wrote the information that was then going to be replicated by a printer on the label. So label copy was literally printer copy this information on this sheet of paper that someone hand wrote. So I say all that because I think there's a tendency when people do now see the data, and I think increasingly data is more available to all of you through lots of sources, to say, "Oh my God, my data is wrong. Who screwed up?" And the answer is less often who screwed up and more just the product, again, of 50 years of aggregation through all the evolutions of technology. But all of it underscores a couple of important principles. And I think one of the biggest ones for us is you can check your data on the front end and determine whether you get paid properly on the back end. And that's a really fundamental shift. For as long as I've been in the industry, folks generally look to see what they got paid when they get a check, and then they try to figure out what was missing. And what now is available, I think, to anyone, and certainly to those of you here who are business managers, you have the ability to access the data on the front end very early in the process, to check the data and to get the data corrected before your client ever gets paid. And if you can do that, you are in a far better position. So for us, we've addressed that in a couple of ways. One, we also have a publicly available database. That was a requirement of the law. If you go to our homepage, you can click on a public search button, access a public search window, and search all of the musical works ownership information that we have in our database. That's exactly the same data that we use to make those connections between the sound recording usage data that we receive from the digital services and the musical works owners that we then pay. So if you represent a songwriter, you can go look at their songs, and if you see that a song of theirs is not registered, either to them directly or to a publisher or administrator that represents them, you can tell today that they're not going to get paid. You don't have to wait for a statement to know that. Our data is also available in bulk. So for those of you that work for larger firms or who are somewhat tech savvy, you can actually access and download our entire database. Right now, we make it available on a weekly basis. So every week, we have an updated snapshot of all of our data. Because, again, this is a requirement of the law, the cost is nominal. For $100, you can sign up, get access to an FTP site, set up, and then receive your first month worth of snapshots, $100. And then every month after that, it's $25. So literally for the cost of a relatively cheap lunch, you can have access to the entire musical works ownership database that the MLC maintains. And that database represents the ownership information for mechanical payees for every song that's exploited in the US market, which is probably most songs of commercial value in the world because those wind up on the US digital services. The third thing that we have done, and this dates back to the summer, you were alluding to it, Portia, is we created a data quality program. We call it the Data Quality Initiative. And quite simply, it's a way for rights holders to compare their data, the data that they have in their systems or their records, with the data in ours. If they can provide us with an Excel file that has their data and Usually the key identifier for us on the song side is the ISWC. It's kind of like the analog to the ISRC that folks tend to know more about. That's the sound recording identifier. If you have the ISWC, or we call it an MLC song code, it's just a unique identifier that we assign, and some other fields that you want to compare, we'll run a comparison. We can usually get that back to you within a day, sometimes within hours. And the report we give back to you in Excel only shows the discrepancies, the difference between our data and yours. Could be that the discrepancy reflects an error in your system. It could be that it reflects an error on our end. Either way, you see the discrepancies only, so you don't have to look through the haystack to find the needle. You can just see the needles, and then you can quickly decide what you need to do to address any errors that exist in order to correct the data that we have, and then make sure you're paid properly. So that initiative has been incredibly successful thus far. We've had comparisons run for more than 20 million works, almost 10 million unique songs. So again, in our business, there can be multiple shares of a work. So we have had folks run comparisons for at least some share of almost 10 million works. And all of that has then led to a pretty significant number of new registrations being sent into us. Just since January, we've had well over 1 million new works registered through the MLC. So all of that is helping to improve data quality and really to put the power in the hands of rights holders and their representatives to help improve the data quality for their works so that they can get paid effectively.
I'd like to jump in and add that CSAC pretty much does the same thing, although slightly less automated. Meaning you call me up or one of our other representatives, whoever your rep is, and well, you can also, an affiliate also has access to that information through their website. They log in, they can check their accounts and see if the information is correct. If there isn't, they can call us up and they can explain what's up, and it'll walk them through either putting the information in properly or finding out where the disconnect is and correcting that, entering that information in for them so that those royalties are paid effectively and on time. So slightly less, slightly less automated. But we're getting there. We're getting there. I get my chip implanted next week, and then,
James, you underscore another, I think, important thing, and I know all of us are committed to this too, and that is each of our organizations maintains a support team that you can call and get one-on-one guidance on questions that you may have. And that, I think, also represents a shift in that our industry historically was not known for its customer service, in part because the business was small and relationships were managed one-on-one, often through the creative contents at content companies like A&R folks. But today, those of us that run these types of service organizations recognize the importance of having a support team available to help rights holders, large and small, address issues, work through problems. It's a complex business. There are rarely one-size-fits-all answers to questions. So what, James, you describe, I think, is so important. I know Sound Exchanges has great support for years, and Colin can speak to it. And we've got a dedicated support team as well. You can reach our team 12 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and we've got Saturday hours as well. And our goal is to be available to help anyone who has a question figure out how to get that question answered, their problem resolved, so they can get paid.
Right. We're relatively small compared to our competitors. So we've always been very strong on customer service and support. That's been the lifeblood of our business. In addition to obviously with royalties, just maintaining that close relationship with the folks that we represent, the catalogs that we represent, their business managers, their publishers, and being able to help service them with whatever they need. So it's very key, very important business, and we've been quite successful living with that mantra.
And I'll just jump in and add, and sorry, Portia, I did not mean to interrupt you if you're about to ask a question, but just building on an observation Chris made about the customer support. That's true, and we're very proud of our team. Another area where I feel like the MLC and Sound Exchange are really similar is that because we represent the entire industry, like literally everyone participating in it. We're in this unique position to help creators, frankly, learn about royalty streams that they might not have even known about existing. So in our world, to this day, we're having to educate artists about the fact that there are performance royalties for masters. And then in the world of mechanicals, my very strong impression is that there's an enormous number of self-published writers that have no idea that mechanical royalties even exist. They know about the PROs, they know you're supposed to sign up with ASCAP or BMI, and if they're a little more sophisticated, they'd have heard of CSAC. Mechanical royalties, that's not even something that would occur to them. And so, until the MLC was created, frankly, there wasn't an organization that was focused on kind of evangelizing about that entire stream of royalties. And that's a really exciting thing, because then you're pulling people into an ecosystem that they didn't even know existed, so.
Yeah.
I think that, to your point, Colin, that's true. But I also think the reason they weren't aware of that is, it's going to sound like I'm getting on a conspiracy theory. That information just wasn't readily shared and available to writers.
Yeah.
Because the more you ask, the more you learn, the more enlightened you become about the business. Certain folks don't like that. It's less money for them, right? So that happens a lot with a lot of, indie labels, let's say. No offense to any majors or larger independents out there, but just, information is key. Knowledge is key. Knowledge is power. And the more you know, the better prepared you are to ask the right questions. I tell this to writers all the time. The silliest question, the most ignorant question, is the one that isn't asked. So if you have some questions, don't be prideful. If you want to understand what you're doing, ask a question. Our societies are the places where you can go and get those questions answered and get paid, and nobody's going to be in your pocket. Additionally, no one's going to hit you over the head with any crazy fees for that information, disseminating that information. It's definitely cheaper than talking to an attorney for the same information. So, and like I said, we're in the music business, and a lot of times people will, many artists, many songwriters will just leave that aspect of the business to someone else, and that's where you get into trouble. You're signed with these companies for a reason. Not because your buddy at the studio said, go sign up with XYZ company and they'll collect your money for you. Well, a lot of folks do that, and they don't understand why they're not getting monies appropriately, or they'll empower somebody else to do that for them, and it gets done incorrectly. Whereas, like I said, the human component, the customer service component from our societies is very important. You have to be able to disseminate this information, explain what works, why things work, what's going to happen here, there, and everywhere, the types of royalty streams that you should be looking for, and moving forward from there. If you have any questions, feel free to come back and ask. Don't be afraid to ask. So that's it. I'll get off the soapbox. I didn't get all the way on. I just put one foot up on the soapbox.
I think you sort of are paving the way for a really, really critical point that what we're dealing with here. When some of us, when I started in the industry, there was still room for what we might call like a journeyman artist, or a sort of a middle class musician. So someone who, maybe sold 10 to 40,000 records a year and toured, and they had their income from touring and from record sales, and they could live sort of a comfortable life on that. And now we have sort of a different situation in that sort of middle tier has changed in our industry. And instead of those two income streams, we now have hundreds of income streams. And so it's actually made it harder in some ways, because if you don't pay attention to where your money's coming from, who owes you money, where to look for it, and to make sure that all your data is correct so that you're collecting all your royalty streams, that could make the difference between being able to be a middle class artist and not, and having to have a different job, which, as we know in the world of musicians is sort of, that's the kiss of death. Like, we want our musicians to be able to be musicians. We don't want them to have to be, baristas who do music on the side.
Well, yeah, that's what's happening. If I can jump in and add to that, I think that the industry, I don't necessarily know that it's harder. You just have to be prepared to, again, to educate yourself about how you're going to go, how you're going to navigate the business. What makes it hard, if you want to use that word hard, is the fact that you've got Spotify to compete with, you've got YouTube to compete with, you've got SoundCloud, all these different mediums where everybody can put up, songs, and they'll find an audience or not. There's a lot of stuff out there that gets discovered and they gain a fan base, and that makes it harder for a middle tier artist, such as you mentioned, to cut through. But if you have a fan base, if you've already established that kind of success, you just have to make sure that you stay connected with those folks, utilizing the tools that everyone else is to gain their followers. You know what I mean? And just think outside of the box in order to make sure that you don't lose anything. So you're not working harder, and you make this technology work for you, so your job becomes easier. It becomes a little bit more easier for you to figure out where you're going to play next, who wants to see you, do home shows, and you can establish. I have several writers that have been quite successful through the years, just doing private shows and concerts up and down the West Coast, from San Diego up to, Seattle and back down, Sometimes they'll even go into Canada and perform there and then come back down. They make a trek. They haven't within the last year, obviously, but they've been quite successful over the last 10, 15 years, done quite well for themselves. But you have to be that special kind of person. But that's what makes the kind of artists that you're talking about. Those kinds of folks, those middle tier artists that sold, would you say, 40,000 to 70,000 records, maybe went close to gold by those standards back then. Those guys still exist, and they're still passionate about what they do. So you got to take that passion and kind of just, tweak the system a little bit so you can continue your engine. Keep your engine running, keep moving that needle forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, one of the questions they suggested that I ask you guys is are there any collaborations between collection agencies these days, collection organizations? Which I'm totally going to ask you and you guys can answer. But one thing I wanted to say is it's sort of getting back to what Colin and Chris were talking about. The availability of your databases, the public availability of your databases is such a huge innovation for our industry, because we have had an industry where we've been historically siloed. It's like, oh, this is my proprietary data and I'm over here and I've got my little slice of the pie and you can't have any. And so that is a real big deal that you guys have this public facing information.
I agree. And I think that trend will continue, because as it becomes more apparent that data is the key for everyone to get paid properly, I think folks recognize that it's better to let the data out, let everyone see it, and let everyone contribute toward making it better so that we all get paid better, than it is to try to hoard the data and game the system. I've often said that the MLC really is built on this fundamental idea that we will crowdsource our data through our rights holders. Like Colin described at Sound Exchange, we not only view the rights holders' view of their data as dispositive, we only accept data from rights holders. So your friends can't register your share of the work unless you authorize them to do that for you in our portal. And that at times can create a frustration where someone says, well, I just want to do it for everybody in the band. Well, many of you know that not all bands get along and not everyone can speak for everybody. So our view is the rights holder is the source of the information. And by opening up our data and our platform so that everyone in the world can see it, the good, the bad, the ugly, we now bring everyone into the process. Everyone can look at the data. And most importantly, the people who care the most about the data can look at their data. When we speak with songwriters, even songwriters who are published, we'll ask, who do you think knows more about your data and ultimately cares more about your data than you?
Right.
And nobody, because it's yours. These are the songs you wrote. You were in the room. And ultimately, you're the beneficiary, the primary financial beneficiary of those songs. So having the ability for you to check your data is really powerful. And whether you then manage the rest of the process yourself or you partner with a publisher or an administrator, which makes a ton of sense in this world where it's so complicated, either way, you can still play a part in helping to ensure that you get paid properly by looking at your data. So I think the more that data opens up, the more that everyone has a view of the data, the better the data is. And that benefits everybody. That lifts all boats.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. And then I would say probably the primary way that there's collaboration right now around metadata is through the various standard bodies. So two that come to mind are, so there's the DDEC standards, right, which are really a set of standards around communicating information about releases and about licensing. And there's a variety of sort of various DDEC standards. One, the DDEC RDR, I think is what it's called now. They had to change its name, which is the way that record labels communicate to DSPs. There's a DDEC standard that's being developed that's really targeted at getting information about what happens in the studio, right? To get the information, whatever information you can, as close to the time of the creation of the recording as possible. And then there's a DDEC standard that is in the works around musical works, which is in a little bit, it's at this point sort of parallel to CWR, which is a different standard, and that's the sort of dominant one around musical works. So there's the standards bodies around, like DDEC is an example of the one around communicating information. And then another one, and maybe the most critical set of standards, are around identifiers. So Chris mentioned the ISWC, there's the ISRC, there's ISNI, which is about identifying performers. There are other sort of, or really creators. For these identifiers to work, it really requires widespread adoption by the whole industry, but they're really essential. The ISRC has become the identifier for recorded music, right? And in the digital ecosystem, virtually everything ultimately resolves to a particular recording. And so for better or worse, that has become the way that assets are identified in digital music. Really largely replaced the UPC, right, which is what you would use for CDs and other physical product. And so these sort of standards bodies are where the industry comes together and says, okay, what are the problems that we're facing and how can we best address them so that we're all really talking about the same thing?
I think that's a really great point, Colin. And I know, for us, that was a big part of our process. The Copyright Office issued extensive regulations on how our process would work, the data that the digital services were required to give us. And then we were partnering during the regulatory process with DDEX to feed to them the output of that regulatory process so they could establish DDEX standards that the digital services could then use to ensure that those were all embedded in their systems and processes. So, as a result, today we have 60 digital services that have sent notices of license to the MLC, or a small number that have sent notices of non-blanket license, basically saying they're going to stay out of the process. But of the 53 that have sent notices, all 53 of them are now sending data to the MLC in exactly the same format. They're sending all the same data in the same format to us. And that's what's allowed us to then aggregate all of that information, process royalties and send out statements to our members that show royalties across all of the services that have paid royalties in the same standardized way. So now if you're a rights holder in the song side, you get all of the data for your digital audio mechanicals, whether they originated from Spotify or Apple, Amazon, or some of the really small services like Choral Tracks or GTL. All the data is the same. It comes in the same digital format. You could even download it in the same file and load it directly into your systems. I know for the business managers watching, you have struggled with that for decades because every source of revenue for your clients comes in a different format and it's a different layout, and you've got to try to normalize all that information. It's these types of standards that are helping organizations like Colin's and mine to standardize what we deliver out, which in turn can help you to aggregate that information for your client and put it together in a comprehensive picture that represents their earnings. So those are the things that I think don't get well reported, but that are having a real significant impact on the quality of reporting and ultimately the accuracy.
Yep.
Well, we're creeping towards the end here, you guys. You made this, a conversation about data and rights went really fast. I'm impressed. I think I just want to say one thing, and we mentioned that my organization's put on over 50 events in the last year. We recently put on an event in which we had an artist keynote, and he spent the entire keynote talking about how he did a forensic review of his own catalog and then brought that to each of the services that he needed to make sure where, the MLC, Sound Exchange, his PRO, everything. And he said he made something like 15% more money following that forensic review. And so I think it's important to just point out and highlight over and over again that, studying the data, going back in and making sure your metadata is clean and it's correct and that everybody has the right stuff is like, that's the point of this whole little exercise.
And don't assume because your client has been around for a long time or they're really successful that automatically means the data is right.
Right.
I have seen throughout my career data issues at every level. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the most successful artists miss those data issues because, quite frankly, they're making a lot of money. And so, if you're making a lot, you're not worried or thinking, what am I missing? But I think there's always value in reviewing the data because, it doesn't matter how much you're making. If I said, hey, you could make 10% more, you're already entitled to it. You just have to fix this data. No one would turn that down. Everybody wants that. And I think for, again, those of you that are in business management, that's an opportunity, going over on a periodic basis, auditing, not auditing in the traditional sense, but auditing the data, checking the data to make sure the data is accurate is a really worthwhile investment that will inevitably pay dividends. Certainly, anytime rights change hands, if you have a client that is working with one company and then they shift to another, those transitions can be really difficult. And data often gets confused or lost in those transition processes. So, anytime you help a client close a big deal where they move rights, in the first 3 to 6 months, as soon as the dust settles, check all the data, make sure those transitions have happened. It's easy to fix stuff in the short term, but when you go back 3-4 years later, it's always harder. It's always harder.
James, do you have a last word of wisdom for us?
What Chris just said. Basically, it's important. Like I said, just don't assume that because your client is successful that everything is all peaches and cream. A lot of times it's not necessarily right or error. Also, the fact that they're making money and they're distracted. Although that's an excellent point. When you're making that kind of money, you hire people to take care of your business for you, and administrative people, not necessarily business manager because you've got other clients. You don't have time to enter in this individual's data for their song, their metadata for their song. So they have assistants, administrative assistants that are supposed to take care of that stuff for them. Many times these guys don't necessarily know, what they're doing, and they're afraid to ask because they don't want to lose that gig. and they enter things in to the best of their ability, and that's where mistakes happen. So you want to be able to dot the I's and cross the T's and make sure that that information has been entered in properly, and in review with your PRO, or your MLC or your standard exchange folks, to make sure that that information that you're looking for is correct.
Totally. Colin, you want to get a last word in?
Sure. I just want to echo something James said earlier and also just now, which is like, ask questions. If something's confusing and weird, ask questions. There's a very good chance something's wrong. And you know what? Like, there's a ton of mistakes and friction in this system, and we're figuring out how to make it work better. And that's the way you're going to learn. The other piece of that is, like, the music industry is it's complex and complicated, but it's not rocket science, and really anybody can understand it, right? If you just sort of spend a little bit of time with some of the details. And so invest a few hours, find someone that understands how all this sort of plumbing works, and you will know where to go looking for your rights and your royalties.
Fantastic. Well, thanks you guys so much for joining me today. This was really awesome. It was good to see all of you.
Nice to meet you. Good to join you, Portia. It was great. Thanks so much.
Take care.
All right, guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you guys. That was super informative, really, from a high level all the way down to some just really pragmatic stuff. So thank you all. Thank you, Portia, for moderating. We really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, Matthew.
Awesome. Take care, guys.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. All right. So we will take another break here. It's the last break of the day. And then when we come back, there's 2 more deep dive presentations. And then we'll wrap up the day. So we will take a break now until 1:55 p.m. Pacific, or 4:55. So a little over 15 minutes. And then we'll be right back. All right. Thanks, everyone.